I held my husband's hand through cancer, fear, and nights he couldn't breathe. When he survived, he left me and said he was done. I did not know that sentence would one day become my whole life in one breath. Back then I was just a wife sitting in a hospital chair that felt colder than it looked, listening to a doctor say words I never thought would be said about the man I married, cancer. It landed in the room like something heavy and invisible, and once it was there nothing felt normal again. I remember the way my husband squeezed my fingers when the doctor stepped out. Not tight like he was strong, but desperate like he was afraid I might disappear if he loosened his grip. His eyes were searching my face for something I did not know how to give yet. Hope, certainty, a future that still made sense. I told him we would be okay. I said it quickly without thinking because silence felt dangerous. I said it because that is what wives say when the world cracks open. I did not know how big okay would need to be. The first weeks were a blur of appointments, scans, waiting rooms, and that smell hospitals have that stays in your clothes even after you leave. I learned how to read his face instead of test results. I knew when the pain was bad even when he tried to joke. I knew when he was scared even when he said he was fine. At night he stopped sleeping like a normal person. He would wake up gasping, sometimes shaking, sometimes just staring at the ceiling like he was counting how many breaths he had left. I learned how to wake up before him. I learned how to place my hand on his chest to feel it rise and fall. That became my lullaby. Breathing meant tomorrow. People always talk about being strong like it is something you switch on. But strength for me was learning how to swallow fear without letting it show. It was making food he could not taste. It was pretending the future still existed the way we planned it. I stopped being a wife in the normal sense without realizing it. I became a schedule. A nurse, a translator of medical words, a shield between him and reality. Friends would ask how he was doing and I would answer for him. Doctors would talk to me instead of him because I remembered everything. Slowly, quietly, I became the center holding everything together. I told myself this is what love looks like. Not the dates, not the laughter, not the pictures people post. This mess, this exhaustion. This choosing someone every day even when you are afraid. There were nights I cried in the bathroom with the fan on so he would not hear. I would look at myself in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes always tired, her hair always pulled back, her life suddenly very small. But every morning I showed up again. I helped him sit up when his body refused. I learned how to motivate him when his mind gave up. I reminded him who he was before illness tried to erase him. I told him stories about our future like they were already written, trips we would take, things he would do again, the life waiting for him on the other side of treatment, and he believed me. Or maybe he believed the version of me who never sounded tired. I remember one night clearly, he could not breathe properly. The room was dark except for the small light near the bed. He grabbed my arm and whispered, "Please do not leave me." I promised him I would never go. That promise became my identity. Months passed, treatment changed him, weight loss, hair loss, mood swings, fear that came out as anger, and still I stayed steady. I told myself illness was talking, not him. I forgave things without being asked. I learned how to love quietly without needing it returned in the same way. Somewhere in the middle of all this I stopped asking how I was doing. No one else asked either. People only wanted updates on his condition. So I became invisible in my own life. But when the doctors finally said the word remission, when they smiled and shook hands and talked about recovery, I felt something like relief mixed with grief. Because I realized I had survived something too. I thought this was the part where we find each other again, where love comes back lighter, where we rebuild. I did not know that healing would become the moment everything began to fall apart, and that is something no one prepares you for. Not the illness, not the fear, but the silence that comes after survival. This is only the beginning. And it gets harder from here. After remission, people expected celebration, balloon smiles, congratulations. Like we had crossed a finish line, but what really happened was quieter. The machine stopped, the appointments slowed, and suddenly we were alone with each other again. I thought this was when I would get my husband back. The man I married, the one who used to talk too much and laugh at his own jokes. Instead I was standing next to someone who felt unfamiliar, like illness had rewritten him and forgot to leave instructions. He was alive, yes, but something in him stayed locked in survival mode, and something in me stayed locked in caregiving mode. We did not know how to come out. I still woke up before him, still listened to his breathing, still checked his face for pain. Even when he said he was fine, I could not stop. My body had memorized fear. He started going out alone, short walks at first, then longer ones. He said he needed space. Doctors encouraged independence, so I told myself this was healthy. But independence felt like distance, and distance felt like abandonment. Even when he was still sleeping beside me, he did not ask for my help anymore. Not with pills, not with appointments, not with anything. The things that once made me necessary were suddenly gone. People praised his strength. They told him how brave he was, how inspiring. They told me I must be relieved. No one noticed how quiet I had become. I tried to talk to him, tried to explain that I needed reassurance, that I was still adjusting. He would nod, change the subject, or say I was overthinking. Overthinking, that word became his favorite way to end conversations. Anytime I expressed discomfort, anytime I mentioned fear, he would say the cancer was gone, that we should move on. but I could not move on from something that had rearranged my entire identity. I had put my life on pause without realizing it. My friends drifted, my work suffered, my world shrank to the size of his illness, and when that illness left, I was left standing alone in the space it used to occupy. He started getting attention again, people who had not been there during the hard nights, people who only saw the survivor version of him. They treated him like a miracle, like a comeback story, and I stood beside him smiling. Feeling like a footnote, there was a shift I could not name at first. The way he looked at me changed, less gratitude, less softness, more irritation. It was as if my presence reminded him of something he wanted to forget, the weak version of himself, the dependent version, the nights he cried. I realized then that love can become inconvenient, especially when it witnesses you at your worst. He stopped touching me the same way, stopped asking how my day was. Our conversations became practical. Food, bills, schedules. I tried to bring back normal, suggested small things, dinner out, a walk together. He always seemed busy, tired, distracted. One night I asked him if he was happy. He said he was grateful to be alive. He did not answer the question. That silence told me more than words ever could. I started shrinking myself, talking less, needing less, because I thought if I became easier, he would stay. I stopped sharing my fears, stopped mentioning how lonely I felt. I convinced myself this was temporary, that healing takes time, but deep down I felt something slipping away, something fragile and irreplaceable. I was still loving him, still proud of him, still rooting for him, but I was no longer part of his future the way I used to be. He had survived cancer, and I had survived loving him through it, but survival does not always mean together. There is a kind of grief that comes when the emergency ends, when the adrenaline fades, and you finally feel the damage. I was exhausted in a way sleep could not fix, tired of being strong, tired of being patient, tired of being the only one trying to hold us. I did not know yet that this distance was practice, that he was learning how to live without me, quietly, carefully, while I was still holding on, and that realization, that slow painful understanding, was the moment I began losing him. Long before he ever said goodbye, the day the doctor finally said he was fully well, everyone clapped. They hugged him, they cried, they talked about new beginnings. I stood there smiling while something inside me went quiet. This was supposed to be our moment, the reward after everything, the chapter where we returned to each other. But instead I felt like my role had ended. Once he healed, he stopped looking back. It was subtle at first, small things. He stopped updating me about his plans, stopped checking in, stopped asking if I was okay. He started rebuilding a life that did not include me. New routines, new energy, new confidence, and I was still standing in the old version of us. I realized something painful. While I was saving his life, he was preparing to outgrow me. He started dressing better, smiling at his phone, laughing in ways I had not heard in months. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself not to be suspicious, but your body knows before your mind catches up. I felt it in the way he no longer looked at me when he talked, in the way he sighed when I entered the room, in the way my presence felt heavy instead of comforting. One evening I asked him if something had changed. He looked annoyed, said I was creating problems, said I should be happy, as if happiness is automatic after survival. I wanted to scream that I had survived too, that I had lost parts of myself in silence, that I needed time, that I needed him, but I stayed quiet, because I was afraid of pushing him further away. He began staying out late, said he was reconnecting with life, said I should understand, after all he had been through, and I did understand, too well. I understood him so much I forgot to understand myself. I noticed how he no longer talked about us, no future plans, no shared dreams, only his goals, his desires, his freedom. One night while folding laundry I realized I was folding clothes for a man who was already gone, physically present, emotionally absent. There is a special kind of loneliness when someone leaves you slowly, when they are still in the room but no longer with you. I stopped feeling like his partner. I felt like a reminder, of pain, of weakness, of a chapter he wanted closed. He avoided conversations that went deeper than the surface. Anytime I mentioned us, he would say he needed positivity, that negativity could ruin his recovery. So my feelings became a threat, my pain became inconvenient. I began editing myself, choosing silence over honesty, smiling when I wanted to cry, because I believed love meant sacrifice, but sacrifice without care turns into erasure. I watched him come back to life, while I faded quietly in the background. I remember standing in the kitchen one morning watching him laugh on the phone. The sunlight hit his face, he looked healthy, alive, free, and I realized something heartbreaking. He no longer needed me, and worse, he no longer wanted to. That was the moment I felt disposable, like I had done my job, like I had served my purpose. I thought love was about staying, but I was learning that sometimes people only love you for the version of themselves you protect. When that version disappears, so do you. I went to bed that night next to a stranger, and for the first time since his diagnosis, I cried not from fear of losing him, but from the certainty that I already had. He had healed, and in the process, I had started disappearing. And what was coming next, I was not ready for. But it was already moving toward me, quiet, certain, unavoidable. The house still smelled like medicine when he told me he wanted a divorce, not literally maybe, but I could feel it in the walls, in the drawers full of old prescriptions, in the chair where he used to sit during chemo, in the quiet that followed his words. He did not sit down. He said it standing like he was delivering news he had already practiced, his voice calm, almost relieved, as if saying it out loud finally set him free. I remember nodding before I even understood what he was saying, because my brain refused to accept it all at once. Divorce felt like a word from someone else's life. Not mine, not after everything. He said he needed to live, that surviving cancer changed him, that he wanted a fresh start. He said we had grown apart, as if we had drifted gently, as if I had not been holding him together with my bare hands. I asked him if there was someone else. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He said yes, not proudly, not shamefully, just honestly, like it was a fact he no longer felt the need to hide. He said she made him feel alive, that she did not see him as sick, that with her he could forget. That word broke something in me. I realized then that I was not his wife anymore, I was his memory, and memories can be painful. So people replace them. The divorce papers came quickly, too quickly, like he had been planning this longer than I knew. I held them in my hands and noticed how steady they were, no shaking, no guilt. I signed with hands that had once adjusted 4 lines, hands that had wiped his sweat, hands that had prayed silently beside hospital beds. I wanted to scream, to remind him of everything, the nights, the fear, the promises. But I did not beg, because love that needs begging is already dead. He packed his things, not the old clothes, the new ones, the ones I had never seen before. When he walked out he did not look back. And that hurt more than any word he had said. People told me to be proud of myself, to say I did my duty, that I was strong, but strength felt like a punishment, like something that cost me everything. I sat alone in that house, the same house where I once whispered encouragement into the dark, and I realized I had been replaced not by another woman, but by a version of him that no longer needed saving. The hardest part was not the divorce, it was the rewriting of our story, where he became the survivor, and I became invisible. He moved on publicly, smiling, living, posting happiness. I stayed behind quietly, trying to remember who I was before survival became my personality. There is a cruelty in being left by someone you saved, because no one prepares you for that kind of grief. It has no name, no category. I did not hate him, that surprised me. I hated the emptiness, the way my life suddenly had no direction. The house felt too big, too quiet, too honest. I learned that love does not guarantee loyalty, and sacrifice does not guarantee forever. The divorce finalized, a stamp, a signature, an ending. And I stood there realizing something terrifying. The chapter 1 built my whole identity around was over, and I had no idea who I was without it. But somewhere beneath the shock, beneath the sadness, something else was forming. Not hope, not yet, but awareness. And that awareness was the first step toward what came next. After he left, the silence changed. It was no longer waiting for his breathing, no longer listening for pain. It was just quiet, honest, uncomfortable, mine. At first I did not know what to do with days that did not revolve around someone else. I would wake up and reach for my phone out of habit, then remember there was no update to check, no appointment to confirm, no medication schedule. Losing him felt like losing purpose, because caregiving had filled every corner of my life. When it ended I was left with space, and space can feel terrifying when you have lived in survival. I walked through the house slowly, noticed things I had ignored for years, dust on shelves, cracks in walls, pictures that told a story that no longer existed. I packed away medical supplies, box by box. Each one felt like closing a chapter one never chose. I cried, not loudly, just quietly, like my body was tired of making noise. People expected me to be angry, to curse him, to hate the woman he chose. But what I felt was something else, a strange mix of grief, relief, and disbelief. I grieved the version of myself that disappeared, the woman who put her dreams on hold, who loved without keeping score, who believed sacrifice would be returned. And then slowly something shifted. One morning I realized I had slept through the night. No panic, no fear, no listening for breath, just rest. That scared me more than sadness, because it meant I was starting to let go. I began doing small things for myself, not big healing moments, just small acts, cooking food I liked, sitting in sunlight, walking without a destination. I noticed my shoulders dropping, my jaw unclenching, my body coming back to itself. I started remembering who I was before illness became my language, before fear dictated my choices, before love meant disappearing. There was guilt at first, guilt for feeling lighter, for laughing, for imagining a future that did not include him. But then I understood something important. I had already paid my price. I had loved deeply, I had shown up, I had stayed. What he chose after that was not a reflection of my worth, it was a reflection of what he could carry. I stopped asking why, stopped replaying conversations, stopped wondering what I could have done differently, because the truth was simple and painful. I loved him through his darkest chapter, but he did not love me enough to stay when the light returned, and that truth hurt. But it also freed me. I began telling my story, not for sympathy, but For clarity, I wanted people to understand that loyalty does not always come back. That survival can change people, that sometimes you outgrow the ones who saved you, and if you are listening to this wondering if you were not enough, let me tell you something: you were not too much, you were not weak, you were not foolish, you were brave, you loved when it was hard, you stayed when it was terrifying, you gave without guarantees, and if someone could walk away from that, they were never meant to walk beside you forever. I no longer wait for an apology, I no longer expect closure. I found something better: peace, peace in knowing I did not abandon myself anymore, peace in choosing a life where love does not require erasure. He survived cancer, that is true, but I survived loving someone who could leave after being saved, and that took a different kind of strength. If this story feels familiar, if you see yourself in these words, know this: you are allowed to start over, you are allowed to choose yourself, and you are allowed to heal too.